3.0. Nice to see everybody here so early in the morning. Hope everyone had a chance to get some breakfast. And for anybody that's, going after their exercise, I think we're going to get a lot of steps in today, going back and forth between the sessions and the vendor exhibits. But I'd like to get started. We have two individuals that are going to speak to you today about virtualization and how you can leverage that investment that you've made either on the desktop side or in the data center. We have John Flannigan from Wake County that's going to talk about the desktop. And we have Todd Porter from the city of Winston-Salem, and he is going to speak to you about virtualization and sort of that next-gen data center that you can look to build. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to John.
So what I'm going to talk about today is for what virtualization 3.0 is for me and in the user computing space. And that's really bringing in virtual desktops and applications. Because as you start out with your initial deployment and you grow it, very quickly turns into a big ball of wax that's difficult to manage. And to fully leverage it, you need to pull it back in. So as Nancy said, my name is John Flannigan. I'm the IT engineer at the CITRIX platform in Wake County government. Right now we have a team of two. I'm the senior engineer. We have a junior sysadmin that assists me with the platform. Give you a little bit of background on the platform itself. On my latest report that I ran, we've got about 800 endpoints. The vast majority of it is application streaming for public health and social services. We've just recently in the last year started dipping our toes into desktop virtualization. Last year we had about 175 endpoints. Hope in the next month or so we're going to bump that up to a little over 200. I've got my email address up there and LinkedIn. Feel free to connect. Feel free if you guys have any kind of CITRIX initiatives going on, feel free to reach out. I'd love to talk about this stuff. So if you guys run into any roadblocks or anything, feel free to reach out. More knowledge to be shared about it. So virtualization 1.0 was your initial deployment. It's simple, clean, efficient. It was built to do one thing, solve one problem. The world was great with it. It was simple to support. But as you had success with the platform, your success led to growth, and the platform probably very quickly became very difficult to manage and bloated. Very quickly, the platform gets ahead of you instead of you managing the platform. So virtualization 3.0 is about bringing it back in, simplifying your platform where you can, where it's needed to help simplify and manage things, scale it out. It's all about taking back control. And for it to be successful, you really need to be open to change. So we'll start by talking about the endpoints. We'll work our way back. And we'll give you the ideas of where issues are, the solutions, and kind of what we've done here at Wake County. So with your endpoints for desktop virtualization, you've got two options. You can have thin clients or zero clients. Either way you go, they tend to lead to islands of infrastructure. They're difficult to manage because you may have one configuration for one area over here, another configuration over there. The clients from our experience tend to have issues where if you make a configuration change, it's a pull on boot instead of a push when you make a configuration change. It's also easy to end up with a mixture of different types of clients, different big clients, thick clients, homebrew clients, just depending on where you're deploying and what their use is going to be. Another issue that we've run into, especially with zero clients, has been hardware compatibility. Zero clients tend to have just enough operating system to reach back and deliver a CITRIX or a virtual resource. They also lock you in with a specific platform. So if you get a WISE client specifically made for CITRIX, that client can only ever be used for CITRIX. So you can never, if you have a platform change, you'll never be able to go to VMware. Because of the limited OS on them, like I said, you tend to run into hardware compatibility issues with scanners, printers, and USB devices. and they also tend to be somewhat expensive. But we do have options. Like I said, you have the choice between thin clients and zero clients. Zero clients are cheaper, but they tend to have compatibility issues. But the big thing to look at when you're looking at all of your options is the management tools. That's going to be the thing that really separates everything out. Our story at Wake County, we had our first VDI deployment about a year and a half ago. It was for a homeless shelter. Our county manager did a walkthrough and was appalled that there were no PCs for the residents to search for jobs and stuff like that. So we had a mandate to deploy something in there quickly. It fell in a part of the budget year where we really didn't have any money to throw at the problem, so we couldn't go out and buy desktops and put them in there. So we ended up deploying homebrew thin clients. We took some surplus PCs, installed Linux on them, locked them down, put them in place until we could put something else out there. Obviously, that's not an ideal solution because that's definitely an island of infrastructure that's difficult to manage. Several months later, when we had the money, we did some evaluation. We decided to go with zero clients. Just the big thing on that was the cost. They're relatively inexpensive compared to the thin client. And at the time, from what we looked at, the management seemed fairly simple. But as our deployment grew, we found that the zero clients that we were deploying, we were actually writing configuration files and publishing them to a website that the clients would pull down. So we very quickly had issues where if a change had to be made for a specific changing room or somewhere else, so where we deployed this, it became a management nightmare because you had to push the update out the night before the client removed so it could pull the configuration. We also started, like I said, running into hardware compatibility issues. We started specifically in public areas where the public can then look for jobs. We started getting reports of thumb drives not working. And what we found was because of the relatively minimal OS on the zero clients, if the thumb drive wasn't partitioned specifically for FAT32, FAT16, or FAT16, it would not work. And the problem with that is a lot of newer thumb drives aren't partitioned for that, or they're partitioned with a secure partition. So we started looking at other options, and after doing a quick evaluation, we've settled on iGel, which is, they're not one of the top 2 brands out there today, they're the fastest growing one. The things that made iGel stand out for us was configuration management was very much like working with Active Directory. You set up folders similar, and you treat them similar to others, and you just layer the configuration down on top of the folders. And you place the thin client in the folder of the configuration that you want to pull. If I'm in the middle of the day and I need to reconfigure thin clients, so they're going to do some training that I need to reconfigure the room for, I can make a quick change and push out that change immediately. Another bonus for the iGel thin clients is you can buy the thin client themselves. They're a little pricey. They're more expensive than a zero client, but the other thing in addition to their management tool that makes them stand out is the fact that you can purchase a license for the thin client OS for a fraction of the cost, put it on surplus PCs, manage them, and use them just like an iGel thin client. So the retail, I think, for the iGel thin client is roughly $400. The license for the software is retail about $80. So it's a really great way that we found we're going to be able to leverage our stock of surplus PCs. So stepping back a little bit, away from your endpoints, the next area where you can run into some issues with management is your storage. With success and growth comes a lot more storage use, a lot more VMs. That can quickly outpace the scale that you initially predicted, especially in your first deployment. The big thing you need to keep an eye out on for this is your IOPS. That is a huge thing for VDI. If you really want to test your storage, go VDI. Because you're going to beat up your storage pretty badly. The SAN performance is also something to take into account. And other VMs in your environment. So, you know, being a virtual environment, things that are happening elsewhere do impact CITRIX itself. And in fact, I think a good example of that is we don't have very many outages. Usually when we do have an outage, it's not specifically CITRIX, it's something else. But one of the outages, or two of the outages that we had in the past couple of years have been related to DR exercises, where they were restoring databases on the same SAN storage that I was on. And it couldn't keep up. And so your solutions for that, unfortunately, you really don't have too many. You can have dedicated storage, or you can do all flash storage. Both of those are extremely expensive. May not necessarily be ideal for offsetting your IOPS. Or you can go with an IO cache. And this is the route that we went with. And basically what it is solid state storage on all of our VMware hosts that cache all of the IO. So if it's having a hard time keeping up with the read writes on the back end, it caches it locally and it puts it in one thing. Moving back a little bit farther into compute and VMware, you're kind of really going to run into the same issues there. Your other VMs in your environment are going to impact your CITRIX environment. This is another spot where growth can very easily outpace your initial estimates of scale. Things that you can do in this area to help you out: isolate your VDI application virtualization environment on their own VMware cluster. That way, if someone is doing some crazy stuff and with a DB on another host, it's not going to impact you. Don't forget about cloud hosting. We've had some situations with us where we've considered it, particularly with virtualizing PCs and libraries. We don't want all of that IO public, the stuff that the public are doing going on in our data center. Cloud hosting was a good solution. Unfortunately, we couldn't make the numbers work, but it's definitely something to keep in mind, that especially too with CITRIX. CITRIX does integrate tightly in with most of your cloud providers. Another thing you can do, be mindful of your VM count, and you can easily do that with CITRIX using a share model where you're presenting a server OS skinned to look like a desktop OS. So you can present the server 2008 and look like the user, they're using Windows. And finally, another solution that we're considering is HyperConvergence. And if you go through the vendor hall, there's probably about 10 or 15 people more than happy to talk your ear off about that. So what exactly is HyperConvergence? Most of us are probably familiar with it, but basically what it does is it pulls all of what's been going on in the virtualization space in the last 10 or 15 years into one box. So 10 or 15 years ago, VMware really started getting market share for virtualizing your servers. Then they started moving, once they conquered that and perfected it, they started moving into networking as a service, either through VMware's virtual switches, through Cisco's Nexus 1000s. Plenty of vendors have picked from there. And then storage as a service. So what it does is it pulls all of that into a single box that does everything. It handles all of your storage and all of your compute. Scales out extremely easily. If you need more storage, you just throw more storage blocks at it. If you need more compute, you just throw more compute blocks at it. Configures itself very quickly. In one demo that I saw, they expanded a VMware cluster by one node in 5 minutes. It completely installed VMware, configured it, pulled it into the cluster and in the vCenter, and in 5 minutes it had VMs on it. This also helps you with your storage issues because depending on, or no matter which one you go with, you're going to have dedicated storage. All built into the box, so you're not going to have issues with databases stepping on your toes and things like that. Hyperconverged solutions that are out there are compatible with just about any hypervisor. So if you're Zen server, if you're VMware, Hyper-V, you're covered. If you go with Nutanix, Nutanix actually has their own hypervisor now called Acropolis. So if you go that route, that's actually a way to save some money too. And like I said, there's several options available. Nutanix seems to be the market leader, but even looking at Nutanix, there's several options there. Most vendors out there have their own rebranded, so Lenovo, Dell, or you can go with Nutanix themselves. Stepping back more into the software layer for Citrix, VM provisioning is another area where you can kind of clean things up and tighten up. For anyone not familiar with Citrix and provisioning, there's two options. You have machine creation services, which basically has Citrix tied directly in with VMware. There's no additional infrastructure needed. You just point your infrastructure at it and go. It integrates with most hypervisors on the market. Everything is managed from single pane of glass in your Citrix Studio tool that you use to manage Citrix. You can spin up and create new VMs through there. One of the drawbacks of it is it does use a lot more storage than the other options because instead of streaming machines, it's actually spinning up an entire new VM off of templates. Because it also spins up VMs on demand, it uses a lot more IOPS. Typically with people's initial implementation of Citrix, a lot of people start with this just because it's a lot easier, it's less infrastructure to manage. But there are a lot of people, like I pointed out, there are overheads in storage and your storage performance. Your other option, a lot of people do not initially deploy this, is Citrix provisioning services. Overall, it has a much lower storage requirement because the VMs that you deploy through this actually pixie boot from an image that Citrix hosts out. So instead of having, you can have a VM with a 100 megabyte stream disk that only takes up, that one VM only takes up about 10 gig for the scratch disk that you get it to cache. Since it's not spinning up new VMs on demand, there's a much lower IOP overhead, but there is additional infrastructure to support with this, but it's definitely infrastructure that's worth spinning up and managing. Staying in the software stack, another area that you can rein it back in at is with your images themselves. Particularly early on with Citrix, or if you're really busy, you have a lot of deployments going on. Spinning up a new image for every use case, it's really easy. It's a lot harder than taking a generic image and making it work for something. The problem is if you make a new image for everything, your environment's very quickly going to spiral out of control because you're going to have so many different images to manage, patch, and basically do your care feeding up. People tend to shy away from generic images just because they're so hard to implement. The issue with them is, especially as you start going down that path, one size doesn't fit all. You can't force people to use this one thing because you're always going to have situations where users in a department need a specific application. You've got pockets of people who need Adobe Professional and things like that, and that just wouldn't be on a generic image. Going down that route and forcing people to use it tends to make people not happy with VDI, and they become very resistant to it. But you have tools available to you out of the pocket, out of your initial deployment to help you do this. One of the things that we've done with some of our training rooms to help us make our images much more generic is use Citrix within Citrix. So we'll have, if a user logs in, they get the generic training room image, but then specific applications that they need for their job show up and are being streamed to them through Citrix. Like I said, it's best to use a generic image for VDI as much as possible. It does help with your storage and image below. Like I said, deliver applications since you're streaming. This all helps you reduce your VM count. One of the issues you will run into, especially with the shared model, is the fact that your user profiles are not static. So when your machines reboot, profiles are blown away. So you will need to use profile redirection. Citrix has it built into it. It can be a little clunky, There are tools available to help you with that though. FSLogix has a really great, or is a great tool for that. It allows you share out, or have a share of VHDs where every user's profile is stored. So when they log into a VM that you're hosting out through Citrix, or an application that you're hosting through Citrix, their profile from that VHD is mounted as their profile. Another way to help out, you don't necessarily have to do Citrix application streaming. There are other tools. You can have a super image that has basically every application that you host on there, and then use a tool like Accents to restrict what the user sees in your login. So I mentioned tools. One thing I would highly recommend, especially if you're a Citrix customer, is to check your Citrix licensing matrix. Depending on what level of Citrix support you have and your licensing on XenApp or XenDesktop, you're probably licensed to tools that are going to make your life a lot easier as well. One of the biggest ones is Citrix Director. If you've used Citrix before, Citrix Studio is very clunky. It's probably one of the slowest loading MMC snippets I've ever used. It's definitely not something you would want to give your help desk if you partition out the user rights. Citrix Director is a web-based tool that you may be licensed for that can make simple tasks like logging users in and out much easier. You can give your help desk access and things like that. In addition to that, it's really great for coming up with your performance metrics and capacity for Citrix. Another tool you may be licensed for is AppDNA. That's a tool that you'll get a lot more use of outside of Citrix as well. AppDNA is a tool that I looked at for a couple of years, and I'm like, there's no need for this. I don't see any need for it. I'm not going to get anything out of it. But basically what it is application compatibility testing. So as you're trying to evaluate if a tool or an application is compatible with Citrix, either through hosted shared model, say a Windows 7 application, if you want to see if it'll run under Windows 2008, 2012, or 2016, that's your tool. It'll analyze the MSI, or it'll actually spin up a VM on the back end and analyze the installation of the exe and perform. There's about 1,500 tests on it that it runs, and it'll find compatibility issues and let you know what they are, and if it's aware of fixes, it'll actually link you to knowledge base articles on how to fix it. Your desktop teams will likely get a lot of use out of this tool as well. You can do, if you step away from the Citrix world, you can do compatibility testing for Windows 7 and Windows 10 migrations. So if everybody, I'm sure everybody in the room right now has a project underway for Windows 10, this is a great tool for that as you're trying to shoot more applications. The thing that sold me on it is it does a patch impact analysis. You can create a catalog of all of your applications, point this at WSUS, and kick off a report every month for patching of potential impacts that you're going to have on your applications for patching. So this is, it'll really somewhat reduce your reliability on a pre-patch release group. And finally, the other great thing is it's great at finding candidates for virtualization. So as you run all your applications through this, it shows you an application matrix on things that would be great for, or good candidates and good fits for virtualization. And if you're looking to save money, depending on your Citrix licensing, you may be licensed for Xen. So finally, two last points I'd like to go over are your peers are probably one of your best resources that you have in the Citrix world. We're lucky that we've got a lot of really good user groups in the area. Nickel Giza, their mailing list is fairly active with users asking questions. Citrix is spinning up their Citrix user group community for state and local government right now. It's not one of the more active groups, but I've been on some calls with them, and they're driving really hard to get this going. In fact, they're going to have a luncheon online, and Randy Price is going to be presenting on what they're doing with CITRIX. Social media, believe it or not, there's a lot of really good communities out there, specifically on Reddit. If you're not familiar with Reddit, it's basically just an online forum where people can upvote things that are good and it floats to the top, and if it's not good, they download it and it falls off the front page. Citrix.reddit.com is a really good community. They're very friendly for people who may not necessarily be as knowledgeable as experienced with it. I've gotten a lot off of that. And the Reddit sysadmin community, sysadmin.reddit.com, is a fantastic resource for all things infrastructure. And as far as blogs, if you're not reading, or if you haven't read Carl Stalkler's website, that guy really should be writing Citrix's documentation and training. If you're doing a pilot or upgrade installation for a new version of Citrix, check out his website. Before it comes out, he's going to have step-by-step instructions for upgrades, installations, and everything. If you're considering training for Citrix, check his site out. You can actually go through and follow the steps. His labs are just as good, if not better, than Citrix training. Also, vendors. They're a great resource. This is one of the few areas that I've worked in where it really felt like my vendors were a partner instead of just trying to sell me something. If you run into an issue, reach out to vendors. They'll very quickly put you in contact with someone in the area. You know, we're all seeing the same problems, so there's no point in reinventing the wheel. And they can very quickly put you in contact with people that they know for sure has seen the problem. They're also very good about raising product awareness and providing training opportunities. So again, don't hesitate to reach out to them. It's been an invaluable resource for us. And finally, this is probably one of the most important things as you're trying to rein it in. If you don't do this, you won't grow, so you won't have to rein it in. But don't forget that you provide a service to the customer. Too often, people, especially at the infrastructure level, you're far removed from your customers. You don't see them on a day-to-day basis. But just don't forget that they're there. They don't understand the technology. Citrix gets blamed a lot. I joke that probably about a third of my job is saying and proving that it's not Citrix. But don't get frustrated and take it out on the user because they don't. Another thing that's important with them, when you deploy anything Citrix related to a customer, you're changing their world. And a lot of times they don't take that very well. So, or they're a little nervous about it. So it's very important to check in with them and check in with them frequently because you don't want them to feel like that you threw this thing out there and abandoned it. And then finally, in everything that you do, always be conscious of your platform's reputation. You really want to be in a place where the customer is coming to you saying, we want that, as opposed to you going to them saying, we'd really like to deploy it there, and we heard from so-and-so that they had a tough time, couldn't get any help. So always be aware of your platform's reputation. That's it.
Thanks, John. What I'd like to do is go ahead and let Todd start and go through his, and then we have time at the end. If you have questions for either one of the guys, they can both stand up and respond.
While she's bringing that up, John brought to you the endpoint solutions to virtualization. And I'm going to come at you from the backend data center solutions. Obviously, the backend, as John was stating, the infrastructure is kind of back-end, but not always in front of the customer. But we have a big impact to our customers, and just the words virtualization, if it's not deployed right, we have all kinds of issues. Okay. When Nancy got me together, my name is Todd Porter. I'm with the city of Winston-Salem, and I'm over the infrastructure services for the city. So let's talk about when we say virtualization in the data center. What do you think about when you say virtualization in the data center? Most people just go straight to the endpoint virtualization, desktop virtualization. We talk about CITRIX. We talk about all the other virtualization in the data center. If you get into the data center, you talk about servers. You talk about VMs on servers, but it gets a little bit much more deeper than just server and application in the data center. Maybe people think about shared resources on servers. Standard stuff, CPU, NICs, enclosures, and all that good stuff. Then you may talk about the hypervisor. If you say I'm going to virtualize my data center or my servers, you talk about two big ones, Hyper-V and CITRIX. And I'm sorry, I'm going back to CITRIX, but vSphere, VMware. Our data center, we've been in a virtualized data center now for about 5 years or so, fully. We started our planning 6, 7 years ago. Obviously, we just can't get there in a data center world to support our end users overnight. We talk big dollars, hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars to build solid data centers. So we transformed from our data center from the old mainframe web days to a client server infrastructure to all this virtualization in the data center. So when we say virtualization in the data center, we're talking about some of these things, but more. Okay, so go into that transformation of your data center. Obviously, it takes planning. Because planning is going to lead to budget requests. Obviously, building a data center and building this technology in data center is big dollars. And then even if you had the money, switching out all that infrastructure at one time is nearly impossible. So you have to have a plan to gradually get to where you want in the data center. Obviously, virtualization, as I was talking about, integrated computing. Once upon a time, it was these standalone servers. And then you get into all this enclosure and blade infrastructure. But you have to plan that out. Think about what you want to do in the big picture. So when you plan your data center, you understand your goal. Now, in that process, it's going to be, because the budgets and the amount of dollars to build out a data center, it's going to be over the course of years. So in that process, technology is going to change. You're going to want to stop, oh, this is the newest and the latest and the greatest. Let's get that in there before you build out what you initially started. So obviously, when you build out this infrastructure, you want to build an infrastructure that can scale. So obviously, another thing in your data center, as John was talking about, that impacts his endpoint is storage. Storage is a big deal. It used to be, okay, give me a hard drive, but it's a lot more than that because the virtualized infrastructure now encounters storage. Networking. All right, so we went from our standard, maybe calendar switches. We're a Cisco shop, I may talk Cisco. We're a NetApp shop, so if you hear me talk vendor related things, this is our computing infrastructure. But networking in our data center, obviously, that was one of the first things we had to do when we started thinking about virtualizing our data center. So we went from the Catalyst series of Cisco to the Nexus series. Obviously, if you talk to some of the Cisco folk around here or some of the virtualization folk around here, you're going to hear them talk about Nexus. They got a whole line of infrastructure, but we had to build our data center based on where we were going, where we were at that present time. So we had to have something that was scalable, flexible, enough to support the new technology and the legacy technology that we were trying to migrate from, and keep operations going at the same time. The Nexus provided that in the data center for the network. And obviously, all that stuff in your data center means nothing if you can't manage it and keep it running. So you got a series of tools out there that you have to maintain. You have to have the knowledge. You have to have the skill set to manage all that stuff that's in your data center. Okay, so I talked about the city's architecture a little bit, but let's talk about how we're laid out. We have two data centers. One data center we have on site in our city hall. That's what we call our primary data center. But we co-locate with Wake Forest and Health Sciences, and we have our same setup over there at the secondary data center. So that allows us to build our redundancy, our active setup, and we'll talk about how we use it for DR here. Talked about planning. So when we started this planning, we knew our big picture, and my colleague is going to talk about strategic planning later on today, but the whole strategic plan with this is to, I can tell you, this is when I was technical, we had a major outage for a big function at the Coliseum. Thank God we don't run the Coliseum today because of presidential candidates up there. But we had a major outage up there. And this was with NC-REN. I'm pretty sure everybody in here deals with NC-REN in some way. But this was, I'm a little older than most of you guys in here, but we had a major outage. And at that point, we knew we had to do something not just from our internal data center, but our whole infrastructure, from redundant internet pipes to, I mean, just data centers. We had to rethink how we were going to provide services for the city. So with that came to data centers. Obviously, we had to plan how we're going to run operations in that data center. We had a data center full of servers. I bet we had over 100 physical servers in our data farm, storage farm in our data centers, but we had to rethink all of that. Talked about the Nexus architecture. We are fully redundant between the two data centers. We run the 7000 series today. One in our primary, one in our, call it our secondary data center. I don't like to say our backup data center because it's really an active architecture. We're, like I said, we're a VMware vSphere shop. We're also a CITRIX shop, but I'm not going to talk about endpoint, but it's going to play, as we talk about the data center, that plays a big role into what we're building back into the main data center. And we talked about NetApp storage. I see I got my NetApp expert here right in front of me, so I got to be careful how I talk about some of these technologies. But I say all that to say we had a big picture plan, and we knew where we wanted to go, and it took some work to get there. But we got there for the next, for phase 1 and 2. Now, we obviously technology is steady growing, so we built that flexible infrastructure for that next step. Again, we talk about convergence, but that whole infrastructure is a converged infrastructure architecture, from server infrastructures to storage to the whole nine. So that allows us to grow, and when the customer grows, and when we add a new facility or we add a new group or whatever, we are able to stand up infrastructure not from days, but we're talking about sometimes minutes. So that allows us to get there. And that converged infrastructure, and if you guys know the different converged infrastructures with the solutions out there, with NetApp, Cisco, VMware, they call that converged infrastructure FlexPod. FlexPod is really a solution that when you bring all that infrastructure together, you're going to have problems in your storage, you're going to have problems in your server virtualization, your server platform, your compute platform, and it can get confusing. So you want really, I call it one neck to choke. So we call that 1-800 number, and everybody on that team is aware of our architecture, and they can be able to provide support of any platform up there. Now, they may redirect you to another engineer, but at least you're not trying to call storage people, server people, networking people, and trying to get them to talk. They're aware of this architecture. And that's what the convergence of the infrastructure architecture brings. So again, let's talk about our redundancy. We have over 400 virtual servers in our infrastructure today. We have 2 enclosures. We have 1 enclosure at our primary data center and 1 enclosure at our secondary data center. And we're going to mimic that. We mirror that architecture across those 2 data centers. I'm going to just talk about the data center, but we do it from the internet standpoint, the DMZ standpoint, but all that infrastructure is redundant, and that allows us to do a lot of cool stuff that we're going to talk about here in a minute. In that same infrastructure, we have 5 clusters, okay? So we support the development, the web, obviously the Oracle Linux side of it from our database standpoint, VDI, we call VDI some of everything in our environment. We are rookies in terms of endpoint infrastructure. I said rookies, we've had it a few years, a couple, 3 years, but we just like you stated earlier, John, that we started out with this hosted share, and we said that we were new at this game. So we deployed this infrastructure out to our customers without really saying this type of customer needs this type of endpoint infrastructure in terms of whether it's virtualized applications or virtualized desktop or share. So what we're doing now, my desktop supervisor over there is working on the same strategy that we did in the data center. We're working on a desktop endpoint. I'll take the desktop out of it. The endpoint strategy for the city. So that's coming, and obviously we have basically out of the 400 up there, we probably have 350 Windows business application servers. Talked about the flex part a little bit, but we're going to talk about the redundancy here. So we have today NetApp 8040 controllers. We just did a huge migration. Dan, when was that? A couple. Last year, man. Seemed like forever. Okay. Yeah. So we just did a huge. We were NetApp shop with 3040s. 3240s, and we just migrated up to the 8040s. And again, this is all in our strategic plan, and we're going to talk about it in a second. But we did that migration. Fortunately, we budgeted for it, and we had the budget approved. We've been pretty lucky with our budgets to maintain and build this architecture. The virtualization via the cluster mode data on tap is what we do today. These are some of the things that's in our virtual world we use. Again, I go back to what we think about when we talk about virtualization. Our whole storage infrastructure is virtualized. Okay, so we use the virtualized storage machines. We build those and tie those into our unified computing, which is also virtualized. So now you see all this virtualization in the data center. It's just not one big word, virtualized, but all these technologies coming together and converge together to make everything virtualized, and allows you to be more flexible to do other things that we're going to talk about. Two is obviously backing up and storing and protecting your data. Obviously, we have to do that several ways. We replicate data to our secondary data center to make sure data is protected. Today, we dump that data to take and we store it off to a remote site for retention purposes. I say today because moving forward in our long-term plan that I was talking about is to re-architect and revisit how we do backups and more online backups and get rid of some of the hardware and the complexity of that whole architecture. So, but today we're still doing some of those things. And we're doing it through some slick tools. I mean, I don't know how many of you guys out there are NetApp storage customers, but we use their Snap product to do a lot of this data movement and mirroring. We're also a Symantec net backup shop that we use in our environment that's also virtualized in terms of the architecture to make sure that one is down, the other one picks up, and all that good stuff. But that whole infrastructure now, Veeam is coming in and trying to sell us the whole new world, which has got some slick stuff. Well, when we were doing that, we wasn't completely a converged data center. So now, over the period of time, while we build this big plan, you see the technology changing. Well, they come in with all these virtualization tools now to allow us to do backups and all that good stuff much easier. So that's what we're enacting now. With the objective of building those 8040s, wow, with the objective of building this new storage infrastructure, we want to completely do, I talked about all this active stuff with redundant internet pipes and redundant storage controllers and our server infrastructure redundant and then active and all these clusters I talked about. Well, one last thing, one thing that we want to do with the next step in our controllers is to implement this metro clustering mode. Of true active. Today we use the Snap tools to mirror data, okay? To move data and do all this cool stuff from data center to data center. But the next step is to do it automatically. So we want it active, so just like the rest of our infrastructure. So when we got data over here and we shut down this, it's automatically over here, just like we do our cluster service. So as you can see, this plan is moving forward now. So that's our next step in that architecture plan. Obviously, all this stuff is slick, cool, and nice when it works. And we've been lucky with that, and we've got some pretty good engineers on our team to keep things running and architected. But you have to be experienced with a lot of tools, and as the technology changes, you got to beef up your training and your skill sets. Excuse me. So I'm not going to go down the list of all the tools here, but these are some of the tools that we use in our infrastructure to keep that virtualization running. These are just a few tools that we use, but these are the key tools that we use for the different platforms, from the UCS computing platform to the VMware platform, from the server virtualization platform, NetApp, and NC Prime for just our Nexus network. We use NC Prime for our network as well as our wireless infrastructure. So those are some of the tools that we use to manage our infrastructure. All right. So the whole idea of all this virtualization is to get things faster. because everybody wanted yesterday. And obviously, we're at this stage now where everybody wants to merge their data with your data to get more information. This whole big data thing is causing back-end data centers to rethink how we architect, compute, do things faster, merge databases together, do the whole nine. But we talk about our desktops. We run our hosted shared desktops without our data center. In our strategy for our desktop, we're going to revisit how we do that. It is a place in our infrastructure for that, but we have a place in our infrastructure to do bigger and better things with that. But it's all about getting information faster. For business applications, we have a ton of business applications. If I don't, I think I get a count of 169 different types of things in our environment. We needed that because we're doing some assessment right now, but it's a ton of applications out there. We need to deploy them faster when the customer needs it, when our council members ask for things, they want it yesterday. So we got to make sure that we can build the infrastructure to do that. We just talked about the big data and analytics. Well, obviously big data is coming, whether it's coming out of your data center or somebody else's data center, that compute has got to be there to do that type of work. So as you build data centers, or as I keep talking about our data centers, but part of our plan too is to build an infrastructure in our data centers, so when the need, and we're starting to get there, but when we have to move out to somebody else's data center, we've built that infrastructure now and continue to build that infrastructure to make that migration much easier. Obviously, we just talked about the sharing of meaningful information. Solutions management, we go back to all the twos we just talked about, but you have to increase all those administrative controls when you put that technology out there. Obviously, this is a big one. We're doing all, you provide all this information to your customer. You're providing quick desktops. You're providing, everything is quick and I need it instantly. But you open the door for increase in data security problems if you don't think that through. So part of our strategy too is as we build this infrastructure, we build a strategy around security. Security is just a big thing these days, as all you guys know, that is, you can't turn on the TV or open a new book or a newspaper. There's some kind of security breach out there. But we're obviously security is multi-layered, so as we build these multi-layered technologies, we build these security around that. Meanwhile, we're doing all this stuff, shifting in technology, building all this great stuff, and for the city of Winston-Salem, we don't get an increase in staff. So we're doing this with the same staff for the most part. But what it does is, because if once you get there and all your technologies are converged and you start to merge all this stuff together, now whether it took 3 or 4 people to handle the desktops or storage or whatever, or the server farm, now you can redirect your staff to do other things. And recently, we just went through a kind of organizational change in infrastructure services, well, in the department, but more so infrastructure services, where one of the key resources that is storage and help Dan out here in managing the virtualization of the servers has been shifted. Because, first of all, Dan is the man, he can handle it. That's one thing. 2 is that you know, we got all these slick tools and this technology that's converged that now can redirect that staff to do other things. Now, you know, where the costs come in is you got to keep that person trained, and they got to be willing to go with change. So staff is a big deal. Now, I talk about that because all this is supposed to be some return on your investment, right? You know, that's when you go to the budget and say, I need X amount of dollars, what this is going to return this, and we're going to save money here and all that good stuff. Well, all that stuff is true, but a lot of it is hitting return on investment. Like I stated, we don't get more staff. We got new technology, which is high dollar, but we have to shift staff to maintain that. So, yeah, we're not asking for more staff. Well, we're not going to get more staff, I'll put it that way. So we have to, so we're recycling that person to do other things. Where you're going to, where we're saving money is the operating capital expense. We saved a lot of money just by virtualizing our data center. Our data center, before we moved, was just incredible. It was just, you walk in there and it was, you know, I think more equipment and more impressive it seems to be, but it was just so convoluted. It was tons of servers and server farms, old, well, we switched from mainframe, so obviously the data center footprint was much bigger. Well, if the footprint is much bigger, it takes more to cool it. If it takes more to cool it, you put in more power. Okay, so you got to plan all that stuff out when you move to when we moved to our other data center, which the footprint decreased dramatically. Floor space, power, cooling, all that. We put a meter in our data center to monitor the power usage. And that was one of our sustainability tests that we used to show that we decreased the cost and power when we asked for all this money to virtualize our data center. So that's where we sell that ROI back to senior management, is this is where it balances itself. Server racks, servers itself, all that stuff has changed. Infrastructure and applications availability. All right, this is the big ticket because this is going to allow you to sleep at night. It does for me, because once upon a time.
That was a spills take.
Yeah. Once upon a time, it was well, those help too. Well, I think that's the biggest part. I'll put it that way. But once upon a time, the infrastructure was so big, and we, like I said, we had multiple people doing some of the same things, but their roles were different across the platform. And that was, you know, when you had a crisis and pulling a team together like that, and this person is specialized in this area, and this person is specialized in this area, you got to get them together and keep them cross-trained and all that. It was complicated. Now, getting to this point, I'm not saying it wasn't complicated, but once we got there and we got everybody up to speed, life was much easier. We were fully redundant. We for the most part, we can do our maintenance while we keep operations going. You know, it allows us to do patches, test, without impacting our customers. So that is very big. And then, again, we're talking about the agility of an infrastructure like this allows us to bring up service quicker, resource allocations. So we need more resources on the application server because we got more users out there doing bigger things. We can do that on the fly. Disaster recovery. So again, all this stuff I just talked about allows us to have a disaster recovery site. And we do have a disaster recovery plan. But this infrastructure allows us to get there. And that's how we use our active data center for also a DR site. Through some of these technologies I just talked about, replication of data, snap technology, and obviously, we just talked about staff, reshifting, redirecting their responsibility to do new technology, retraining staff. And preparing for the future is what in our bigger picture is obviously we're moving other things to a cloud solution. So through all this virtualization that we've done, it's going to allow us to take the next step and move to the cloud should we need to, or bigger and better technology.